Good morning and welcome to First UU. My name is Tom McFarland. My pronouns are he, him. I am of Irish and Scottish ancestry, a descendant of both the Highland clearances and the Angortamore diaspora, actions of genocide by early colonialism to displace the peoples of those lands. I'm wearing a Black Lives Matter hoodie and otherwise all black in solidarity with Native and Indigenous peoples and in opposition to the continued acts of genocidal violence and displacement against those people, their land, their water, and personhood rights in the current day.
My name is AJ Fox. My pronouns are they, them. I am of Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and Norwegian ancestry. I am a pale, freckled human wearing a burgundy dress and black leggings, and I begin this service by honoring that all of the work Tom and I share here is the direct result of the efforts of Indigenous individuals, and we are simply uplifting their voices. We are deeply indebted to the work of DRUM, the diverse and revolutionary UU Multicultural Ministries, the Muskegee Seminole Creek Documentation Project, the song preservation efforts of Juanita McGritt, Kyle Bell's work for the Creek Tholoph Loco Tribal Town, the Urban Indian Health Institute, and the continued efforts of Indigenous Unitarian Universalist ministers, religious educators, and lay leaders within the Unitarian Universalist Association, who have offered their deep emotional labor to help us understand the ways that white supremacy and colonization have influenced our faith.
We're a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. This year at First UU, we are exploring the gifts of our faith. October has challenged us with the theme of heritage. This week, we are honoring Indigenous Peoples Day and looking at the relationship between our Unitarian Universalist heritage, recent and long past, and Indigenous people. Today, we are going to light a second candle next to the large chalice. This is in recognition of the past and continued harms to Indigenous people across the world in the wake of colonialism. The candle will stay lit throughout the service and be extinguished at the end of service with the chalice. We will also offer a moment of silence.
Does this microphone imply it's on? Wow, we have two microphones. Okay, sorry. Just like our moment of silence after the joys and concerns each week, a moment of silence is a way of honoring and offering space for something. Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge, says, during a moment of silence, its participants may typically bow their heads, remove their hats, and refrain from speaking or moving for the duration of it. In planning whole worship, we might say developmentally appropriate silence. That means that any of us who are able to offer silence, but that we acknowledge and accept that not all of us are able to. From the gurgling of babies to the coughs of adults and breathing, from the wiggles of the underdeveloped myelination that leads to the jerky movements of infancy, to the palsies of old age. We love you, we accept you, and our practice in this moment isn't intended to overshadow the grace of community.
Could I have Ryan come up to light the candle, please? On this service, just before Indigenous Peoples Day, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Niukanska people, known sometimes by the name Osage. The descendants of the people who were forcibly removed from this land by colonists make up the Osage Nation. We acknowledge their continued struggle for justice. Please join me in 1 minute of shared silence, holding the grief and power of the continued struggle of the Indigenous people for struggle of Indigenous people for justice in the Ozarks, across North American continent, and around the world. We come together. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's our moment of silence.
We come together to honor the rich tapestry of cultures, wisdom, and resilience of Indigenous peoples throughout the world. We acknowledge that this day is a reminder of both the ongoing struggles for justice and the enduring strength of Indigenous communities. In the glow of this chalice's flame, we kindle a spark within ourselves. This flame represents our community to stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, to listen to their stories, and to amplify their voices in our ongoing quest for justice. May this light remind us of the work that lies ahead as we strive to rectify past wrongs, preserve Indigenous cultures, and build a more inclusive and equitable world for all. The chalice lighter in the sanctuary this morning is Emily.
And Isaac.
Chalice burning bright, help us see and do what's right. Give hope and comfort with your light. Chalice, chalice burning bright. Chalice, chalice burning bright. Help us see and do what's right. Give hope and comfort with your light. Chalice, chalice burning bright.
The opening music is Ancient Mother, a congregational hymn. It's number 1069 in the Teal hymnal. And it says here in the hymnal that it is Navajo. What is the process we used as a community to check in on this piece for cultural appropriation?
Oh, that's a great question. So Unitarian Universalism is a faith tradition that draws from many sources, which is beautiful and important and inspiring. And also from a power dynamic and cultural appropriation perspective, means that a lot of our service components and educational materials, our stories, our songs, our activities, our chants, readings, etc., were gathered and sometimes became beloved in our congregation before we really had a strong understanding or rubric for cultural appropriation. So give me 1 second. Vonnegut, you don't want to be called out on the mic repeatedly. Can you be really quiet so we can't hear you up here? Thank you. Sorry, Tom.
No, it's quite. The theme of the month is Gift of Heritage. Unitarian Universalism is being called to explore the gifts of honoring our shared cultural heritage in a more truthful way, specifically regarding Indigenous peoples' heritage. The gift of reclaiming our roots is to make the invisible visible and receive the gift of healing. Embracing hard things about our history frees us. In preparation for this service, I found a 2007 UU World article where now UUA President Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt encourages, before using a piece of music, a reading, or an artifact from another culture, research it, she says. Ask yourself how you are in relationship to that culture and why you are using it. Include information about it in the service so people understand its original significance. Later in the same article, Reverend Danielle DeBona is quoted as saying, if you're getting ready to do something in your congregation and you wonder if it might be cultural misappropriation, then step back. Think about it further. It can take courage, says DeBona, for someone, especially a person of color, to confront misappropriation in a worship service or elsewhere. If I do that, what I don't want to be told is that I misunderstood what I experienced or that it was done as a way of honoring my tradition. She says that defeats the conversation. What is helpful is to have a conversation about the meaning of ritual and how my people lost their language and a way of life to genocide, and now their religion is being taken too. So I know that Unitarian Universalism has been having some conversation about cultural appropriation for at least the last 15 years.
It's true. That conversation has been happening. But it's not like there's like a list out there of what is and isn't cultural appropriation. It takes a lot of behind the scenes research that wasn't included in our original anthologies or curriculums. It's sometimes clear when we start researching that there are very obvious issues. Sometimes it's more complicated.
Because this is a church space.
Partially. In a broader culture, when we talk about cultural appropriation, we often start with a question of who profits. But here, nobody is profiting. And sometimes we talk about closed and open practices. This becomes especially important in pagan UU communities. The practices of using dream catchers, spirit animals, white sage smudging have whole long conversations dedicated to them. But a lot of the time we pass the initial sniff test for cultural appropriation. We aren't benefiting financially. We aren't selling something. We aren't participating in an obviously closed practice, but the nuance gets tricky fast. What does it mean to take a sacred practice from a different tradition, especially when power dynamics are considered?
And again, on the UUA website, I see a couple of different lists of questions. May I just ask about this upcoming song?
Sure.
So this particular list of questions starts, it is important that we learn to differentiate between drawing from the wisdom and appropriating rituals, artifacts, and other elements of the spiritual traditions of other religions. In the words of author Max Warren, our first task in approaching another people, another culture, another religion is to take off our shoes, for the place we are approaching is holy. Else we find ourselves treading on another's dream. More serious still, we may forget that God was there before our arrival. To appropriate means to take possession of specific aspects of someone else's culture in unethical, oppressive ways. Cultural appropriation is acting in ways that belie understanding or respect for the historical, social, and spiritual context out of which particular traditions and cultural expressions were born.
That maps with my understanding.
Question. How much do I know about this particular tradition? And how do I respect it and not misrepresent it?
Well, that is a huge issue with the upcoming hymn. The hymn book just says Navajo. The actual name is Dene.
So a question, what do I know about the history and experience of the people from whom I am borrowed?
Not all that much personally. I know the overarching history, but only vaguely. They suffered centuries of colonization and conquest from Europeans, but unlike many Native American tribes, they still live for the most part on ancestral land.
Is this borrowing, distorting, watering down, or misinterpreting the tradition?
So I knew nothing about this song before the service, to be clear. I've heard it sung many times in this church, but mostly I'm digging around in stories and metaphors in this space. But as I started researching at first, it was being cited as a chantway, which is a religious ritual chant that is held for days and days at a time, between 2 and 9 days. So if this song was a chantway, it would 100% be taking a deeply sacred practice and watering it down for simple consumption during a Unitarian Universalist service, which would be suspicious.
Wait, the UUA has more questions we might consider, but you said that the last bit with a lot of emphasis. If this song was a chantway.
So I spent a couple hours online the other day trying to track this down, and it just doesn't exist as a Dine song. In fact, it doesn't exist anywhere before 1995. And the only translation I can find of these English lyrics is to/from African, which isn't a language. So the whole thing basically fell apart.
So where did this song come from?
It appeared in 1995 in a collection of neo-pagan chants produced by a white presenting guy with a degree in organizational psychology from Harvard named Robert Gass. He lives in Boulder, Colorado now, according to the internet. And he just wrote the song as far as I can tell.
Okay. So we need to be clear that this is an active consent space. We are about to invite you to rise in body or spirit, but this is your spiritual practice. And if singing this song on Indigenous Peoples Day does not fit your spiritual practice, please do not feel compelled. This is really tricky stuff. The opening music is Ancient Mother, a congregational hymn. It's number 1069 in the Teal hymnal, and the lyrics will be on the screens. And we'll sing it through twice after Eva plays the tune first. If you're in the sanctuary or any of the other rooms with video, you may rise in body or spirit to sing number 1069, Ancient Mother, the 1995 neo-pagan chant with no verifiable roots in the Indigenous community.
Here.